All right, and welcome back to Morning Express. It is now just about 23 minutes to 7 o'clock, and it's time for us to review the dailies. But I'll quickly just look at the Twitter poll question that we had asked earlier on, and maybe read a few comments. Should the succession debate be a priority? And that's a question that we're going to be looking at right now. And the reason that is asked is because, well, it seems to come up every single time, and one might ask, why is it such a big thing in Kenya? Maybe that's part of what should advise what should be the constitutional question that should be asked later on, or rather the referendum question. Now, should succession debate be a priority? Albert says, somebody is already at it. Ask Uhuruto Raila. That's according to Rafael Biketi. We have, let me see, we have Abraham Lakuto who says Emba is watching. We have bigger issues to talk about. Corruption. That's what is killing us. I'll take one more. Fahad Gamadid says simply no, it is not. Well, we're going to be getting more into that as we go along. But for now, we're going to look at what's making headlines on the dailies, and I'll start by introducing the panel that we have this morning. To my extreme right, we are joined by Alex Manyasi, who's a governance consultant. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Honorable Dan Manzo, who's a member of parliament for Makueni. And last but not least, we are joined by Honorable Anthony Oluoch, who's a member of parliament for Mathare. We go straight into the dailies, and we start off with the Standard. Talking about corruption, somebody there said corruption is what we need to be dealing with, but maybe the bigger picture would also be looking at impunity. And this particular story, how tycoon beat police in game of wits and cornered at last, is how the Standard has put it. He was finally arrested on his way out of court after a hearing, but that was nearly a week after Humphrey Kariuki returned home and stayed safe from a manhunt. But maybe just to widen this conversation a little bit in terms of recovery of assets or monies that the government views has not been taken up by the taxpayer. Maybe I'll start with you, Honorable Oluoch, on even when we talk about the war on graft. One of the big questions that many have been asking is, once the people have been arrested, have been taken to court, released on bail, there's also the recovery of the assets or the money that has been stolen or fraudulently not paid to the taxpayer, and maybe the procedure, and when we get to a point where as a country we begin to actually collect or get that money back.
Yes, I think we have now a system where the government, I think through the Office of the Attorney General, has what you call the assets recovery, proceeds of corruption, proceeds of crime, proceeds of illicit money transfers and money laundering. I think the issue here in respect of this is in terms of tax evasion. I think KRA has indicated that it has contacted, I think, Interpol and other people, so that if he hadn't appeared, I think there was an international warrant of arrest. He presented himself. I think the initial indication was that he, being a person of dual citizenship, a citizen of Cyprus and also of this country, he may have sneaked his way out of the country and probably ended up in Cyprus. But in respect of whether or not the country will be able to recover the tax money is a question of how well we coordinate our relationships with other countries. Whether or not the money is outside the country is a question then that the prosecution has to try and show how much of the money that he's alleged to. I think when I looked at the figures, they're talking about, is it 4-point-something billion?
Yes, billion.
About 4-point-something billion. From what they had recovered, I think some of the properties, I think some aircrafts, and I think some of his monies. So it means that maybe in terms of how much money he has kept out of the country, there's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of trying to be able to trace the proceeds of corruption.
Okay, and how competent, in your opinion, are our agencies when it comes to investigations? Because we seem to have a lot of headlines on people who have been arrested or have been found, wanting or questionable, but we never seem to get to the end of it. Could there be a problem on how thorough our investigations are done? And this is not just talking about him, but generally speaking.
I think we have advanced considerably on the question of our investigations. We've seen the new, the DCI, the multi-agency approach that we have the cooperation with other countries. Recently, you saw, in respect of Kimware and Aror, the DCI and the DPP and the EACC traveled abroad, and they were able to do a lot of tracing. In this era of technology, being able to trace money and how it runs shouldn't really be rocket science for us. I think the question is, how well do we coordinate with the foreign agencies and foreign countries so that when we do trace where money is, we are able to bring it back to the country? I think it is the tail end of this that we really have to deal with, so that we don't spend too much money trying to prosecute these people. One, the prosecutions never get to an end, but more importantly, there is no public disclosure of inventory of, in the last 1 year, in the last 2 years, how much of these monies have we been able to trace. But then again, you realize if the prosecutions don't get to an end and convictions, you remember there's been a lot of talk that we spend so much time with headlines over corruption and busting people and taking them to court. And that's where it ends. Do we get to the tail end of convictions? I think we are at perhaps 1 or 2%. And if you don't get to the tail end of proper convictions, arresting people like these ones will not yield the issue of asset recovery. Because for you to do asset recovery, you must have found, for example, him to be guilty for you to get to the asset recovery part.
All right, Honorable Dan Manso, maybe just you weighing in on the fight on graft, and also there seems to be a very, very deliberate effort from the DCI and the ODPP to ensure that we have arrested. However, the asset recovery end is what sometimes is left wanting.
Yes, as Honorable Loch has stated, first and foremost, it is important to have a conviction. Without a conviction, and it doesn't come easily, because there is a right of appeal, and by the time a matter gets to the Supreme Court, many years would have gone. So one of the things which is being encouraged nowadays is alternative dispute resolution. If an accused person in a matter of this nature, of evasion of taxes, or if you have apportioned yourself government property, one is able to sit down and make calculations with the DCI and the prosecution, and then say, I'm going to recover this, and then you can plea bargain, sort of. And I believe if we do alternative dispute resolution, and one is able to release quite a substantial amount of money is recovered or associated with corruption or evasion, then it makes it easier, and this particular person is able to be cleared and to go back into business and begin afresh and be able to pay their taxes.
Okay. All right. Manyasi, maybe your thoughts on the war on graft and corruption, and the fact that hopefully there's some traction that we're getting, and we can see that there's an effort, but without convictions, number one, without asset recovery, then it becomes more or less, just going round in circles.
Yeah, that's true. And I have said on this show before that I'm one of those Kenyans who are a bit pessimistic about the headlines that we keep getting. Because at the end of the day, unless, like you're saying, we get a conviction, even the police and every agency has to show that the wealth was gotten illicitly for it to be recovered by the government. And so, by extension, that means that we ought to be 100% clear that you're going to get conviction for us to even end up in court. And of course, evidence has shown that all the cases that are going to court, almost none are getting out with a conviction. And therefore, what Mheshimiwa Manso is saying in terms of ADR, the alternative dispute resolution, and it's something that I've also stated before, that I am a believer that instead of us expecting the police to give us a conviction, because that conviction, in my view, starts with the police. It starts with the evidence that is collected. It starts with how they put together the case, and the amount of time that it takes in court. So if you look at those two things combined, then we are better off with, because if it's a tax issue, and remember, let me widen this discussion a bit. If it's a tax issue and we are going ahead as a country to close companies, to seize property, even before the case starts, that means one of the things that we are also doing is that we are also killing jobs in the process. So the easiest way to do, even though it may be unpopular, and that is provided for even within KRA, there's a whole department that deals with the ADR, is to figure out how they can negotiate for these people to pay. Because, I mean, it might take one day discussion and you have your money back. And you might pursue a process for the next 8 years and not get any money back. So it needs to make sense, even though people might make noise about thinking around people having to be bundled into vehicles and be taken to court so that we show that we are fighting corruption. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't amount to anything, then it's a waste of our time. Yeah.
All right, Honorable Oloch, maybe from a legal perspective, excuse me, just the question of mediation, we don't seem to use that much, and negotiation. We seem to bundle people up and not use the avenue of negotiating. But like Manyasi says, maybe there is an opportunity and an avenue where we can recover the assets and possibly negotiate. And is that provided for in law, and how does that work?
Yeah, plea bargaining is something that is well settled in advanced countries like the United States. They do that a lot, for plea bargain in order to try and get lesser sentences, to get into, for example, being state witnesses so that you are able to get a redacted sentence in return, to which you probably become a state witness or something of the sort. In respect of somebody like this tycoon, I think Article 159 of the Constitution, in terms of the principles of our judicial system, it says a number of things, including that, cases will be settled on the basis of alternative dispute resolution. I think it's something that is gaining traction, but it's something that our courts haven't quite used enough, and especially the prosecution, because really the onus is on the prosecution to try and advance that system. It is something that is open to us. Outside of corruption cases, you have seen what the Chief Justice is trying to do. I think they're a bit reluctant to try and wade into the conflict between the
National Assembly
and the Senate and the counties in terms of the division of revenue. So they have opened up that window and said, look, legislation and decisions about appropriation and who gets what really is a function of those two houses. We want to get into it as a matter of last resort. So the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice are taking a huge step and showing that, alternative dispute resolution, and where there is goodwill, it's something that really should be resorted to. My problem with this is that how did KRA in the country get this far? Because this looks like something that has gone on for so long.
For a long time.
For so long. So in terms of our ability to detect, our ability to snoop and find out that things like this happen is something that is really wanting. Where the evidence is overwhelming, if I was the gentleman and is presumed innocent until he's proved guilty, if I was him, I would go for, I would send my advocates, I would send my representatives and say, look, and this happens a lot in tax issues, in return for the monies that you're claiming, this is how I'm going to settle it. I have X number of assets. We can enter an agreement where I pay them in phases. I think instead of dragging himself through court and then eventually ending up bankrupting himself, the kind of stigma that goes with the court cases, I would, if I was his advocate, ask that he goes and extends a hand to the state and tell them, look, let's settle this out of court.
Okay, you bring up an important point there, and that is in regards to detection, and for there to be 4 billion plus that has, in tax evasion, then that obviously tells us it's not rocket science, that it could be a system thing where there are people involved, there are people in it. But of course, the question remains how it has gone on for so long, and maybe what now finally brought him for somebody to blow the cover. But we'll continue to follow up on that and possibly see how that is going to be done as the legal authorities take charge. On page 6 of the Standard, State to pay student doctors, MPs propose. And this, again, is to do with the tussle that has been going on. We have some doctors who apparently have been attached to counties. Counties are paying for them, but at the same time, not guaranteed as to whether those doctors, these are student doctors, after they finish their internship, would be attached to those counties. But again, it also speaks to the question of devolved health. Let me come to you, Honorable Manzo, and your thoughts on, first of all, the question. There's been that debate that's been going on whether health indeed should have been devolved in the first place, because it seems to be failing in the county's hands.
Yes, there's quite a challenge, and the Honorable Jikal, who is a medical doctor, has been very useful in Parliament. And health is really grassroots. The health centers, and the faster you can get somebody assisted in case of injury or sickness or urgent sickness. The structures at the grassroots are very important. The equipment and equipping of the nearest health centers where one can get assistance, availability of ambulances, and more important, training of doctors and nurses. If it can be done, through the counties, almost every county we have a big referral hospital equivalent, such that we are able to give health at the first instance. Because you see, time is of essence when one gets sick, and if you, especially where there is an accident, especially where there is loss of blood, especially where there is a snake bite, a lot of people are dying of snake bites. So health, really, honestly, should have been devolved fully. But it has a lot of challenges. It's also tied largely to the national government in terms of purchasing of the equipment, and the policy has not come out well. So I think this is a matter we need to think again while looking at amending the Constitution, or any future amendments of the Constitution, or a good law. But at least when the state pays students who are doctors or are preparing to be doctors and are able to be stable at the lowest health facility in the counties and in the country, then that encourages, and we will have then medical practitioners, and they're usually very useful, especially when they're about to graduate, when they have taken quite some time, and the trainee is more of apprentice. After the big theory they go through in first and second year. But the rest of the years is more practicals and what you are like to encounter on ground, what is the real situation. So I think I support that student doctors be paid and be encouraged and be strengthened, so that what is happening now is they are running away from the counties. They are going to work in other countries. They are going to train in private hospitals. But if they can be managed and are able to work from the grassroots, then that will really bring medication closer to the people. It is encouraging.
All right. Manyasi, maybe to get your governance perspective of whether health devolution was a good idea, given that it has had so many challenges, yet it is very, very critical.
Yeah, if you look at health generally, you will realize that I had people that I knew who were in the health sector then and today, and some of them actually quit after devolution. Why? Because there are some, for example, who are in charge of hospitals. I can give a classic example of someone I knew who was in charge of some section of Mount Elgon then. And when devolution happened, he used to go to work 2 days in a week, and the rest of the times he was in Nairobi. And that was then. But after devolution, some of them got frustrated because of the close proximity to their bosses. So to a certain extent, if you look at it from that perspective, then you will know that to some extent it helped bring order and closeness to the people. And it was also difficult to even get doctors in far-flung areas of this country. Some counties were making do with 1 or 2 doctors as a county, but not anymore. But now, if you look at the quality of services being offered, that's a different thing altogether. And in terms of looking at how we manage our health sector, then it's also a bit frustrating for the medical doctors to receive instructions from people they do not consider as qualified enough to police them. Not in terms of education, but in terms of understanding the sector. So you might find that there are some people who are managing the health dockets at the county level who have no background at all when it comes to issues of health. And so some of those medical practitioners feel like they do not, the people who manage them do not understand them. But having said that, I guess the issue of having devolved health or not, we need to think about looking at whether accounting for what has happened so far before we come out with a conclusive response to say that health needs to be rethought because it has not worked. Because in my view, I don't think that it has completely failed. I just think that there needs to be another strategy to be used to look at how health is actually functioning at the county level. Probably something to consider is not reverting to the national government, but thinking about something like what the health sector has, which is a commission. But even as we think about that, that commission should not end up as TSC, because we have seen the flaws within TSC where instead of managing education, we have people who are teachers, and no offense to the teachers. If you look at the Ministry of Education, almost the entire ministry is teachers. If you look at TSC, almost the entire of TSC is teachers. And therefore, the thinking around education, and I used to speak to someone who used to be at the Ministry of Education, and he said the biggest disaster that happened in this education, in this country, is to imagine that for you to be in the education sector, then you need to have trained as a teacher. So for health, we need to rethink also, if we are going to structure it the commission way, then we must structure that commission in such a way that it doesn't end up the way the teachers' commission is. Because currently, if you look at even the war between NAT and TSC, people deducting money here and there, withdrawing salaries here and there, people being emotional about things instead of looking at education as an entire spectrum. So the health sector also needs to be re-looked at in terms of thinking about a commission, but not the style in which the TSC commission was set up.
All right. Honorable Loch, maybe you'd like to weigh in on that. I'd also like us to look at something else, but maybe quickly just to weigh in on the health devolution and some of the suggestions that have been made by the CS for health.
Yeah, I think a discussion is imminent on the question of unbundling the functions that we have given to county government, and the discussions on how much resources follow this devolved function. I think the general principle has been that resources should follow functions that have been taken down, and I think the argument has been that some of the things we have devolved to the county government, the national government has withheld sometimes too much that it should have. If 80% of the budget that is given to health is retained at the center, at the national government, it's a question we need to look at and see whether we need to tinker around with the schedule at Schedule 4 to find out how do we ensure that the functions actually operate properly. Because if we had proper resources following the devolved health functions, then it should be easier now for this residency, because I think they call it residency. When a student has finished and they are doing some kind of internship after they have finished their education, the residency doctors ought to be paid, because the reality of the matter is the first person who attends to you when you go to hospital, a lot of the times are these intern students.
Correct.
Because of the shortage of doctors. If you look at the ratio, it's another thing we need to address, the doctor-patient ratio. In terms of the international standards, I think there's a very big gap, and that really necessitates, I think, that we use the residency doctors and then take into account how much it takes to train a doctor. It probably takes a total of 7 years. By the time a doctor is doing 7 years, they probably have already started getting into that area of specializations. I think by the time they're doing their 5th year, they're probably getting into specializations on the different areas. If somebody wants to be a surgeon or pediatric or something of the sort. So really these are people we ought to put on a stipend. We need to motivate them so that when you're having that situation where they're handling patients, they're not doing it as a matter of course. They need to do it as a matter of, they're also attached to it in terms of, so I think one of the things we are going to have to do, and this is not about health itself, it goes to the questions of other devolved functions like agriculture, it goes to things like water, for example. I think we need to review the principle about build and hand over. I've been in discussions where the ministry says their hands are tied. The law says that in terms of water is devolved. The only thing that the national government does is to build a storage facility, provide water, a reservoir, and then the role of managing it goes to the county. The county, as far as I can tell, have been more focused on how much money they make out of what the national government has already done. But in terms of maintenance, do they maintain? And that's a question we also have to take about doctors. If the health function is devolved, and universal health care is a question that we're all going to have to discuss in terms of the big four agenda, universal health care. How much of the county governments, in terms of preparedness and being able to actualize universal health care, how much of the county governments
can take that up. All right, yeah. And maybe just before we wind up the newspaper review, some good news on page 10. I believe it should be good news. Courts to go digital in September, says CJ. And maybe just to get very briefly from you, Honorable Oluoch and Honorable Dan Manzo, your thoughts on this and what that means for Kenyans. Because one of the things, obviously, that has been fought for a long time is just that process of the courts going digital and moving from writing scripts, handwriting scripts, to now where it will be typed. Let me start with you, Honorable Manzo.
Yes, first, I want to support that idea because the world has gone digital and the world has become a global village. The courts is not an exception. Courts are very important and the court records are very important too. We are also moving into a paperless, future. And if you have seen a lot of equipment be already put in the courts, although it's not been effective and it's not been cascaded down to the rural courts. So it is important, if magistrates and if there is recording, we record the proceedings, not just manually, but probably like the way we do it in Parliament, that you can be able to get an answer of some sort. You can be able to know exactly what the lawyer said, what the magistrate said, what was written, what the witnesses said. Justice made efficient. We'll begin working against that old saying of justice delayed is justice denied. Okay. So I believe going digital will be very good, and it's quite expensive, so we must be ready for it. And then I'm sure efficiency in judiciary is important even for commerce.
Okay, I think that speaks to itself. Honorable Oluoch, page 12. Uhuru names lawyers to head troubled land body. Very briefly, NLC, of course, has been a body that has had a lot of trouble, a lot of turmoil, but we have 4 lawyers now. Well, some lawyers that have been named to take care of that body. Your comments on that before we take that break, very briefly.
Yeah, I think there's a fine balance between professionalism, and we've seen lawyer Gerishon Otachi has been put here. I know Reginald Okumu, whom I go to church with at Don Bosco Church. He's somebody who is well schooled in the property area, in land law. I think then he has balanced it off with putting in some politicians, Kazungu Kambi and I think Esther Murugi, who are all former members of parliament. I think the task before them is very onerous. I think the first set of commissioners did what they could do. I think there will be need for us to review, and I think that's the first thing they need to do, is to review how much of the task these people took in terms of the mandate that they have in the Constitution and what things they went wrong. I think a lot of decisions also were very questionable. For example, the Eastern Hotel issue, how public property ends up being allowed to go away and somebody being told have a choice between paying when clearly there is an indication that this was public property. And in terms of historical injustices, I think the last commission actually did 0. The question of land compensation was another thing. The Ruaraka land issue, how public lands, government ends up paying for public land.
Right.
And the question of valuations and insider trading in terms of compensation, SGR land and many other pieces of land that have been acquired, I think those decisions need to be reviewed. There needs to be a standardization of how much tax money we pay for compensation. So we don't end up having land being paid for at 10 times its value, because again, it is
all
a
right,
taxpayer.
I'm going to have to cut you short because we need to take a break, but there you go. That's what we have on the newspaper review, but we're taking a break. When we come back, it's time for Political Point, and our starting point is going to be the headlines on the Daily Nation, why Raila is the man to watch. And that's where we're going to start off our debate on Political Point right here on Morning Express. We take that break. We'll be right back.
This is KTN News.
Anza kucheza na kati ya 10 bob hadi 2,000 na bahati za pesa taslimu zinaweza kuwa zako. Register kupitia paybill number 633381. Play small, win big. Chagua 3 lucky numbers uangukie hadi 600,000 every 30 minutes. Dandia Do, shinda kama pro.
Dandia Do is approved by the Betting Control and Licensing Board. Terms and conditions apply. Please play responsibly.
Going once, going twice, gone. You finally have the most convenient platform to advertise your auctions that's definitely on Digger Classifieds online. Simply visit www.digger.co.ke, upload your ad, and visit any of our branches countrywide, and the Digger will do the rest for you. Advertise on Digger Classifieds today. For booking or information, contact us on digger@standardmedia.co.ke or call 0719 012287.
Formations are just beginning. And I want to tell you that Kanu will be a very big player.
Kenyatta is not on the ballot for the president in 2022. But Kenyatta will be the kingmaker.
Are you an American spy?
Of course not, but if I were, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't be FBI, but I'm not CIA.
If it was a deliberate effort of manufacturing a fake letter, then it is fatal politically.
President Uhuru and Deputy President Ruto, they are working on the same direction, but their journeys end at different endpoints.
When an issue of corruption has arisen, even before you await the criminal responsibility, there ought to be a political responsibility by stepping aside or being removed from office.
Nilikuwa najiangalia kwa kioo naanza kulia kwa sababu unapata ukitembea kwa barabara saa zingine watoto wanakutoroka.
The doctor confirmed I was dead. Na nikaiko kwa body bag. Na nikapeleka kwa semi-mob.
In the middle, a voice spoke and said, Faith, I will heal you. You will regain your health, strength, and you will go back to school.
It became like a whole school affair because they want to see what's there between my legs. They want to see if I go for a short call, do I stand or do I scoot?
When I was more of a moving from Meriwether to James Karanja, and because people in the society could not accept fully, so most of the time they used to treat me as an outcast.
In a country where news develops fast, we make it our business to break it all down for you at the beginning of every week.
Welcome to Checkpoint, the most authoritative news program.
With in-depth coverage, a knowledgeable panel.
If there's one thing that will really change the future of this country for the better, I think it's dealing with corruption.
Whether the Auditor General raised a query or not, we have a responsibility to look at the accompanying financial statements.
Yes. Smart conversations.
Tujue ya kwamba cancer is also about lifestyle. Hiyo ndio Kenya tunataka. Kuunganisha Wakenya wote wewe kama kitu kimoja.
And uncompromised objectivity.
Na nimesema kama nitapatikana na kesi ya kujibu in the spirit of the handshake, Mimi nitakaa kando kwanza, kesi iendelee.
This is Checkpoint.
Access granted.
We are big on conversation.
Kenda mtaani wakuta vijana wamekama base and they have papers.
Big on dance. Big in film. Big on matters youth and also big in music. Youth Cafe every Friday from 8 till 9 p.m. only on KTN News.
This is KTN News.
All right, and welcome back, and it's now time for Political Point. The time is 15 minutes after 7 o'clock. A quick reintroduction or reminder of who we have in studio. We are joined by Honorable Antonio Loach. We have Honorable Dan Manzo and also Alex Manyasi, a governance consultant. Now, Political Point today would like to discuss matters succession politics and why it has continued to be on the headlines, yet we have bigger fish to fry, as some would say. I'll start with some of the comments that have been given through Twitter. And this is following the question that we had asked earlier on. Do you think that it's a priority for us to be looking at who our next president will be? We do know that the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, has been very consistent saying that right now, let's concentrate on matters development. But even as political rallies take place, as launching of development projects have taken place, what really seems to be the underlying story behind it, or the rhetoric, is one to do with 2022. Why is that such a critical thing for Kenya? Let me see some of your comments. We have Weke, who says we have bigger issues to talk about. We have corruption. We have impunity. That is killing us. Why do we need to concentrate on the president for 2022? Others might argue and say that those things that are killing us can only be sorted out from the top. So it is important for us to discuss who the next president will be, or who should be president, or what the qualities of a good president would be. We have, let me see, Sankara, who says, who has been convicted thus far when it comes to grand corruption? Before you start talking about repatriation of assets, we would expect at least a guilty verdict. How do you repatriate money without a court order? That is, of course, responding to some of the discussions that we've already had and following the headline on The Standard. So, the Daily Nation's headline today is why Raila is the man to watch. And that's a discussion we're going to get into. But first of all, I'd like to listen to what some of our leaders have had to say. Starting with the Deputy President, he always seems to bring the name of Raila into the discussion. Not too long ago, over the weekend, after the weekend, he's on record as daring the former Prime Minister to throw his hat into the ring when it comes to 2022. But let's listen into what they had to say.
Mtu wa kitendawili ametangaza ya kwamba anataka kushindana na mimi kule 2022. Kama alikuwa anasema inifikie, mimi nataka nimweleze nimesikia. Kwa hivyo, for the time being, I am busy.
Running around denying the obvious. They say if it works like a duck, quacks like a duck, acts like a duck, it is a duck. So if he works like a candidate, acts like a candidate, quacks like a candidate, he is a candidate.
Rais Uhuru Kenyatta na naibu wake William Ruto, sasa nyinyi pia muingie pamoja, muite mkutano ya chama ili pia sisi tuanze kujipanga kwa safari ya 2022 tulimane na Raila Odinga.
Awaambie wa Kenya ya kwamba akishindwa hata lete kisirani, hata lete fujo, atakubali uamuzi wa Wakenya.
You, Manyasi, on your thoughts on this as a governance consultant. As much as they may say they're at a fundraising or they're at a launch of a project, 2022 just seems to feature. And in this particular case, we can evidently see that the name of Raila keeps featuring. So maybe your thoughts on this, as much as our leaders taking us for a ride, as much as we say we are talking development, really, it looks like it's more of 2022 politics.
Yeah, it's definitely about 2022, which is a bit unfortunate. This country
unfortunately, anytime we get out of an election, we get into another. That is extremely unfortunate because if you look at, even when we talk about development and discussing matters that are not related to 2022, it will always end up a 2022 affair. And so the unfortunate bit is that, and I want to drag in what Senator Sang said. The unfortunate bit is that I think we are already on a very dangerous path based on what the senator said. And it has been quoted, and that is, to say the least, extremely unfortunate for people to start dragging even communities now into this war of words. And for people to start imagining that they are profiling others for purposes of dealing with them is extremely unfortunate. And so in terms of looking at how this country can put together its act, what I see is that the politics and the noise around 2022 is actually a strategy to keep Kenyans away from asking hard questions about what is going on in this country. And part of what is going on is that companies are closing, companies are downsizing, including banks. People are losing jobs. People are promised jobs which they should be accessing. We are churning out 50,000 graduates every year. The informal sector is now at 83%. So we are literally becoming a kadogo economy. So when we talk about 2022 and elections all the time, then the bigger question I keep asking is, when Kenyans are clapping to politicians, when they talk about, unfortunately politicians are here, when politicians are speaking out there and Kenyans are clapping, what are they rejoicing for? So those are things that we need to reevaluate how we think as a country. And as Kenyans, we need to rethink whether our priorities are actually right when it comes to what we expect from the political class. And having said that, it's only fair that we talk about 2022 when we discuss what we were promised to be given these 5 years. I think that is the discussion that we should be having.
All right. Let me come to you, Honorable Lodge, and your thoughts on, well, he has mentioned that politicians normally go out and people are clapping, and it is true, but what is stopping us as a country, and specifically from the top, as to now literally just concentrating on things that matter? Like he mentions, the economy is doing badly. We have companies literally shutting down and downsizing. That is not good for a country, yet we are so obsessed with 2022.
Yeah, it is true. There's lots of stuff that we have in our hands. We're just barely 2.5 years into this election, and yet we want to appear as if the election is next year. That's very unfortunate. I think there is lots of things to do. The economy itself, like has been said, is not doing very well. I think money is not circulating properly. We have issues to do with foreign debts. How are we going to handle the questions of foreign debt? For example, we have 30% of our money that we lose every year to corruption. How will we intensify this? How will we seal the loopholes of corruption so that we stop being reactive? And really, there is only so much that you can do when it comes to dealing with the fact of corruption after it has already occurred. You will arrest all these people. We had said we wanted big fish. That has been done. But then what next? I mean, it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. Mahanzo himself, he has just stated it. Before you exhaust the process of appeal up to the Court of Appeal, that's like 3, 4 years down the line. The wheels of corruption grind slowly, and I think that's part of the reason issues to do with speedy disposal of cases, opening up more magistrates' courts to be able to deal with corruption cases. There's lots of institutional things that we need to do with our country. Other than corruption, we have unresolved cases. We have the Kimwarer and Aror issues that still remain unresolved after the arrests. What next? I mean, the people of Wasingishu and the rest of Kenyans are asking, how are we going to get and kickstart? Where did the money go and how are we going to recover them? We have the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. I think the biggest of them for me is the universal health care. How do we ensure that this is not just talk. It was rolled out in Kisumu. When are we going to roll it out in other counties? When are we going to get universal health care realized for every Kenyan, so that when you walk into a hospital, you're able to access health care at for free. There is the issues about the building of bridges. I mean, the 9-point agenda, for me, the most important is inclusivity. How do you get this country cohesive? How do you get this country to the point where we don't bring it to the brink of collapse every 5 years just because of election? Those are issues that inform the building bridges and the handshake, and we're looking at what are some of the changes. People are focused too much on the issue about positions that it will create. But I think there is much, much more. We have just talked about a few minutes ago about devolved functions.
Right.
There's a lot of what you call constitutional tensions and conflict in the Constitution that we need to unlock. We need
So what, in your opinion, is the obsession with 2022, specifically from the top? And I say from the top because that, as much as I know media will probably be blamed for putting it on the headlines, we report what has been going on. And there just seems to be that consistent rhetoric and talk of 2022.
I think it's the reaction of the fear factor. When you mention something too much and say, kwa Kiswahili we used to say, mimi sikuogopi, and we used to say, oh, pita hapa, kanyaga hapa chini uone kama sitakupiga. So when somebody keeps, it's a revelation of the
inner
fear, the person that they really fear, and the opponent that they really cause them sleepless night is, I think, Honorable Raila Odinga. So they would like to poke him, put false headlines, things that he hasn't said. So that they know Raila has changed his tact. He's basically put all his cards next to his. So that's very uncomfortable for them. In their mind, they know Raila will run. But we want to poke him and see whether he will run or not. When I used to study literature before I did law, when I was in KU, there used to be this book about, I think it was a feminist book when I was studying women in literature, called I'm Not Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And Virginia Woolf was a fearsome feminist, and everybody used to tremble at the name of Virginia Woolf. So in order to deal with that fear, somebody wrote a book, I Am Not Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And I think the story we are saying here is that they're writing on the newspaper and on the front lines, we are not afraid of Raila Odinga, bring it on. But really, it's a revelation of the inner fear. They really would be saying, I actually fear Raila Odinga. I think that's what they really need to.
That's what they're saying. All right.
But before you, as we conclude, you see some of those statements, derogatory statements, coming from Deputy President William Ruto. Very unfortunate, referring to him that huyo msewa kitandawili and all that. And then you see what Chera saying that I hope you will not bring fujo at the end. But who's going to bring fujo? Look at what Cherargei, a right-hand person of Deputy President Ruto, saying we are profiling you. Profiling you for what? So then saying we will deal with you at the right time. Somebody is planning fujo. So the fujo issue should actually not be...
should start actually in his backyard.
Yes, the question should be asked and should be dealt with in terms of who will bring fujo in the event of an election. Right now, as far as I'm concerned, President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga have said they have not sat to discuss 2022. They've not sat to discuss about the candidature. Their focus is on the legacy and on the building of bridges. Yes.
All right. Let me come to you, Honorable Man. So as much as they have said, like Honorable which says they have not discussed 2022, from a political perspective, it would be obvious that that is something that they have thought about. They may not have discussed it, but maybe there are other things to deal with. But part of politics is a game plan. One requires a game plan. And like some have said, he has changed his tact. And according to Murkomen, what he reads that to be, he says if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, then it is a duck. In short, he is saying that's just a tactic that Raila is using for 2022. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, almost that Raila Odinga has quite a following in the country, and he himself personally has not declared that he's going to run. It's that people are pushing him.
And people want to know, I guess, from certain quarters, they want to know what
people want to know whether you run or whether you will not. And politics is full of surprises. I've always challenged Kenyans. Suppose it turns out that the DP ends up working with Raila Odinga in 2022. For now, they are really at opposites. And you can imagine what happened immediately after the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta. The DP started his campaign immediately for 2022. And I think that has put the country in a campaign mood too early and unnecessarily. So I think what's most important is first things first. We've got an issue of cohesion after an election. And that's why the DP is daring Raila Odinga that, you know, there should be no chaos after election. You know, there can only be chaos if the election is stolen. So is the DP planning to steal the election? Why is he worried so much so early what will happen after 2022? So I think first thing first, we've got a country to build. We've got corruption to fight against, because the biggest problem in this country is corruption. And corruption is eating up the country in every sector. You know, public funds are not doing the right job. And if we really save a lot of money, if we stop corruption in this country and we really develop the country. And I think that has been the focus for every political party manifesto. So first we must know, are we going to have a referendum or not? And after referendum, politics will really take shape in the country. So I think he's worried too early. If I were the DP, I would say President Moi was in power for a long time. Next time, I want to support somebody. And I'm sure that will also change the scenario. But yes, but he's so much for it, you know, his greed for power is showing openly that it's like he has no other choice. It's like Kenyans have no other choice other than him for President 2022, which I don't think is the right thing. We must love our country first. The way Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta did, they said Kenya first.
To bring the country together.
You know, President Uhuru Kenyatta would have easily said, look, I'm the president now. I won the election. And, you know, I don't want to listen to anybody. But he said, look, although I've won the election, I know there are issues. And there's something Raila Odinga said so, and showed love for the country. And I want to challenge the DP to show love for the country. Let it not be only about him. It's also about other people. It's also about the country. And he knows very well that there are very many flaws. First of all, he has no political party. What political party is he going to run on? So I believe he has no political party. Jubilee obviously is over.
Is over.
Yes.
According to you, Jubilee is over. And I'd like us to look at page 14 of the Standard, if we can just project that. And it's the cartoon's illustration of where we are as a country. And according to that particular cartoon, we have the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga saying that it is too early to focus on election 2022 elections. However,
it's a nation.
It's a nation.
Yes, the nation, page 14. It's coming. But as that is being loaded, because I'd want us to just look at that, that gives an impression of where we are as a country. Maybe coming to you, Manyasi, one of the things that, of course, the Deputy President is weighing in on in terms of violence, when he talks about violence, is the question of elections, you know, Raila losing elections. However, one of the reasons that we keep forgetting or putting under the carpet is that sometimes that violence or that, you know, unsettlement is because there is perception or fact that the elections are not free and fair. So that is a question that we never seem to bring up. And even as we talk about there being a disagreement, there you go, that's the cartoon on page 14 of the Standard today. It's too early to focus on 2022 elections, according to that cartoonist. But they seem to all be getting themselves ready, you know, up and ready. But yeah, the question of electoral malpractice.
I think the DP is just being smart. So that instead of focusing on saying that we need to get reforms into the election process, you instead paint the other person black and say that the problem is the person. So he's just being smart. So that's what he's trying to do. But the issue of the election processes in this country is something that we should keenly think about. And actually yesterday I was having a discussion with someone about why, for example, the issue of corruption will not end soon, because of the costs of elections. If a member of parliament, and these guys will tell you, if you need at least about 20 million shillings to run for member of parliament, where does that money come from? This money has to be recovered. And coming back to the whole issue of elections and why we are where we are, is that politics in Kenya is about interests. And interest in two ways. One is that there are people who will want to protect their territories, they want to protect their investments, and probably that's where Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta come in. On the other hand, we have other people, other players, who want to protect what they have and create a space for themselves. And that's where other players come in. If you look at the likes of Murkomen and others who support the two entities, for them it's also a game of survival. So you must look like you are in the queue of your boss for you to get favor with the electorate. So all these guys are in the race to ensure that they're doing that for purposes of ensuring that either they're being re-elected, or they are protecting their interests, or they are protecting what they have. So at the end of the day, as long as our political architecture is in that context, then you're going to be in this mix for quite some time. And I have said many times that the biggest saboteur to the entire process is the Kenyan himself. And this is why I say that, is because when Kenyans observe these things happening, when they talk about lack of employment, when they talk about the economy doing bad, when they leave school, what happens on the day before the election? If you listen to Kenyans the day before the election, you'll be shocked at how Kenyans think. At that point in time, we do not, fact is thrown out of the window. We do not ask what happened to us 4 years ago. We do not ask what anyone did for us. All we want to know is the emotions that have been whipped at that point in time is, who is this that is running? What tribe is this person? Where does he come from? You know, it's about us versus them. So as long as we will always be in that mix, as a country, we're going to be stuck in this position for quite some time.
Okay, and I want us to maybe just weigh in on the handshake, because that's been talked about for quite some time. And we have some politicians who would like to think or push the narrative that the handshake really is not so much about peace, it's all about 2022. And we have the likes of Rigathi Gachagua, Honorable, saying that, or maybe let's listen to what he had to say regarding the handshake.
The handshake was nothing but was system to ascend to the presidency.
Na wakati huo wote tumekuwa tumepelekwa kwa kitendawili na sarakasi ya kuharibu Jubilee wakati yeye anajipanga.
All right, Honorable Oluoch, for the benefit of Kenyans, they have a following. Those politicians, they certainly have a following. So there are those who would want to buy that particular narrative. But would there be anything that supports that narrative that it could be 2022? But again, before maybe you even answer, we've seen Uhuru Kenyatta visit Moi. We've seen Raila visit Moi. And those are some of the things that maybe we're saying, look, this could be a strategy that they're coming up with for 2022.
I think it is a narrative that one side of the political divide, for obvious reasons, would like to perpetuate to the extent that they feel that the deputy president would be the casualty of the coming together of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. This comes again as the backdrop of what was a promise made, perceived to have been made, that Uhuru Kenyatta was going to automatically hand over to his deputy, William Ruto. So the handshake appears then to pull the rug beneath them, because the focus now has taken away everything. And I think that the deputy president had assumed that after handing over the presidency in terms of supporting his election, the presidency and running of government would revolve around the deputy. In fact, I think literally the reason, and part of the reason the president seems to have exhaled a sigh of relief after the handshake is that I think there was a quiet stranglehold of the president and the presidency and being held hostage by the deputy.
Maybe even based on the promises that they made. I do 10, you do 10.
Yes. So the handshake itself appears to have, one, given the presidency or the president the opportunity to untangle himself from this. Having untangled himself from this, I think the president quietly harbored this thing that what legacy will I leave? And I think the discussion around the handshake was that after all these fights over the elections, we need to bring the country together. We need to unify. We need to close the ranks. We need to be able to find out what is it that brought us apart. The issues of exclusion, the issues of people feeling left out. Can we look at this winner-take-it-all attitude? And you've had the president saying over and over again, never again do you have a situation where people feel like when the presidency is lost, the rest of the country and somebody who has 6-7 million followers seems to have been left out. And that's the problem. Every time we have an election, some 6-7 million people are happy and seems to be thinking we have won at the expense of another 6-7 million who feel aggrieved, bitter, and angry for the other 5 years.
Is the issue the fact that we have a following that has been left out, or the fact that they feel that they have been shortchanged by virtue of the fact that the elections were not clear? Because democracy is, the winner really is the numbers. So if it was a clear win, then even those who have been left out really should be okay by virtue of the fact that, yes, we lost, but on a genuine number.
And really, that's part of what this thing is supposed to solve. You see, when there is a sense of injustice about the elections,
right,
and people feel, and this has been, the last 3 elections have been a story about a stolen election, a perception that the person who won was never declared. The person in the seat is the person who lost. Those things need to be, I mean, if you win fairly, you look at 2002, we did an election where people moved on. After that, Kenya was considered to have been the most hopeful country in the world. How did we achieve that? Because we had an election where the people conducted the election, people voted, and what was voted was what was announced, and people moved on. People were happy. But you come to 2007, come to 2013, come to 2017. These are 3 elections that we should really forget about. And the way for us to put it behind is to hope that the BBI and the building bridges, apart from everything else that they will tell us, they must tell us one thing. How can we have an election where we go, we vote, and the next day, tomorrow, we come back to KTN and speak about other things? We cannot spend 6 months after the elections talking about how the economy will not move, about to tear gas Monday, about to resist, and about things just need to move the next day. How will we do that? If BBI can fix that, I think they would have done us a
great favor. Honorable Manzo, your thoughts on that and the fact that we're waiting on BBI to give us what their report is and hopefully sort Kenya out. Maybe a referendum is what is going to be the answer, but there are those who also feel that the Constitution as it is already pretty watertight, but we've not been able to execute that to the letter yet.
Yes, well, the proposals of BBI and the proposals we have had so far, all of them in one way or another can be framed into referendum questions. And then Kenyans will decide whether that's the way they want to be governed. Because finally, it is Kenyans who decide. Kenyans can say no. And the moment Kenyans say no, then it means we have to work with the current constitution and the current political structure. And therefore, there will be presidential candidates, and they will compete. So what is most important is after an election, there should be no violence. Kenyans should be able to move on, and we are looking for that unit. We are looking for the reasons we are divided. We are looking for reasons why people were unhappy after an election, after another election, and another election. Therefore, we want a Kenya whereby as soon as the elections are over, we are able to go back to work, and we've got a proper opposition in a country which is able to challenge the government which is in place. And I think there's a lot of hope in that just as it happened in 2002. Kenyans are able to move on immediately after an election, and we are able to develop the country, to take care of the youth. We have a lot of graduates coming out of the universities. They have nowhere to work. We need industries. We need a good climate for people to come invest in, and for people to feel free to trade in our country. At the moment, there are these exchanges and politics 24 hours. Then you discourage, investors and even local investors who want to invest in the country. Yes.
All right, and I want us to conclude because of time, but I'd like us to just get your comments as we wind up, and I'll start with you, Manyasi, on a story, anxiety as Somalia jumps the gun in maritime border row with Kenya. This is to do with the row that we have had in a long time, but it so looks like Somalia is still going to go ahead with the auction for the, the area that is still under the ICJ and waiting for pronouncement from ICJ. So I'll start with you, Manyasi, on your thoughts on this and what that means for Kenya. Should they go ahead and, continue with the auction, then does that mean we are almost having a diplomatic war, as it were?
Yeah, I think for the sake of...
on page 12 of the nation. Page 12
so for the sake of us as a neighbor to Somalia and based on what goes on between Kenya and Somalia and the issues of terrorism and others, I think it makes sense for us as a country, because I saw Parliament was discussing this issue the other day in terms of us deploying troops and such suggestions. I think we need to try as much as possible to refrain and give an opportunity for these discussions to actually be used as a means. Because at the end of the day, it's about these are the resources that we intend to share with Somalia will come to naught if we are not using the proper means and the diplomacy way of dealing with it. At the end of the day, I think as a country, we need to exhaust all the parameters given in terms of looking at how we deal with our neighbors and the disputes that we have. So for now, I do not think that whatever it is that Somalia will do, it serves us best. And I know that we have a program, for example, of getting out of Somalia, I think. I've heard the news. And so we need to focus more on how we build our relationships with our neighbors. And this has not been something that starts today. We know that we've had long discussions with Uganda. I think it's only Tanzania that we've not had any issues with in terms of the resources and the boundaries. And so as a country that is the big brother in the region, we need to show leadership and ensure that we only do things that will keep us together other than move us apart.
And maybe wait for the process.
Yes.
Honorable Manzo, Dan Manzo, as you conclude your thoughts on that.
Yes, this matter is pending before court, and I believe there will be an opportunity for appeal. But at the same time, Kenya as a country has a right to defend its sovereignty, whether the international court decides or not. Every country is free to defend its sovereignty. But again, good neighborhood is very important. And I believe Kenya and Somalia, first of all, we share a lot of border, many kilometers, and we share, Kenyans who are also of Somali origin or share a language with our neighbors in Somalia. So I believe there should be a good relationship between us and Somalia, and that's what the two governments should be working for. Just a border issue can be sorted out even through the leadership. It should not escalate into a situation of war or where lives have to be lost. But while I finish on this, our troops have a duty, and we have a duty to defend our country.
Okay. Honorable Luch, as you conclude.
Yes, when I studied law of the sea, one of the things I remember about it is that most international disputes would always focus on territories where you have, places rich in oil and minerals. This is classic international dispute or territorial disputes focuses on things like this. I think one of the things that I find very curious is that we have always known that Turkana is a place where we struck oil. Somehow, for this reason, now we are discovering that we may have been sitting on a territory that we actually have gas and oil. I mean, who's been benefiting for this? I mean, have we just been sitting over some
gold which we
we don't know. We have been given the impression that our first luck with oil was in Turkana. So we actually have a territory, part of Kenyan territory in the sea where we have gas and oil. I mean, there is something that some people have not been telling us. But having said that, I think Kenya needs to take seriously protection of its territories. And I don't want to appear to be militant, but I think we have been too soft. Look at how we handle Migingo. We seem to be using golden gloves every time we handle this. There's been talk that is not verified that part of Migingo was traded off during President Kibaki's time with Yoweri Museveni. And that's why subsequent presidents have been unwilling or unable to deal with the question of Migingo. Now we have this one between us and Somalia, and it's rich in oil and gas. I think in other international disputes, where there is a dispute before court and another country is trying to say they are going to take action, if I was the head of state today, I would send the military. I would immediately deploy our military and have a declaration of war. And under the international law, they have already indicated, they have shown the aggression. And so if Kenya reacts, it would be in self-defense, and the international law is allowed. If you act in self-defense where your territory or your country is under threat, and Manzo here is a lawyer, he will correct me, there is an international threat here to the dispute and the territory of the Republic of Kenya. There is not a better situation where you can deploy your military and react to that form of aggression. I think we've been too soft, and I think President Kenyatta, as Commander-in-Chief, must show that he will defend every inch of soil in the Republic of Kenya and deploy the military there.
All right, we'll have to conclude there because of time. Thank you very much, Honorable Anthony Oluoch, Member of Parliament for Mathare, Honorable Dan Manzo, Member of Parliament Makueni, and Alex Manyasi, who's a governance consultant. That is Political Point.